In this module, we learned more about deploying cubes into production. We started by reviewing specific deployment considerations related to the files that get moved from development to the analysis services server. When we deploy, whether we're using the bids deploy command or using an XMLA script, the database objects that we have on the server are going to be replaced with the files in our development environment or the definitions found in our XMLA script. The problem is, we may make changes after deployment directly to the database by adding new partitions or updating roles. So a better plan would be to use the deployment wizard, which gives us the option to keep partitions and roles in place while adding in any new definitions for partitions and roles from our development. We also reviewed a dynamic partitioning solution. Although a dynamic partitioning solution can take many forms, we walked through the process of setting up a configuration table to store information about our partitions, learned how to create a partition definition SQL, as well as the XMLA scripts for creating and processing partitions, and then we tied it all together into an automated process through two integration services packages, one to create partitions and one to process partitions. The basis of this solution was to evaluate the data actually contained in a fact table and then build partitions accordingly based on a monthly time slice. But of course, this approach can be adapted to whatever partition sizes you need. Next, we reviewed processing strategies. In general, the process full is the best possible thing to do for databases because it completely empties out the file structures and reloads them and resolves any fragmentation issues that might have crept into a database. If you're dealing with large data volumes, you might get better performance by separating the activities of the process full into separate process data and process index operations, and that way analysis services can devote resources more effectively to each operation. When dealing with dimensions, we can do a process update operation without impacting our cube. But if we have changed members, we might need to run a process default to update the aggregations on our cube. If all we need to do with our dimensions is to add in new members, we can do a process add operation, in which case we don't need to do any further processing on the cube. Our two main options for cube processing, whether we're dealing with a single partition or multiple partitions, is either to do a full process and completely empty out a partition and reload it, or a faster operation would be to perform a process add. But even if you're doing a process add on a daily basis, you might consider doing a process full on a weekly or monthly basis to resolve any fragmentation issues. Last, we learned about database relocation. We can use backup and restore method and use the ABF file that we get from a backup to restore a database on other servers. Another option is to use synchronization. The problem with the restore method is that we cannot query databases during the restore, but synchronization only requires updates to be sent to the destination server, and therefore is a reasonably fast way of updating a destination server with the latest version of a cube. Fastest method, however, would be the detach and attach method. When we detach a database, we can simply move the files to another location, and then we can attach that database to another server. And in fact, if we place that database in a read-only mode, we can have multiple servers attached to the same set of files. That way we can take advantage of separate servers to manage the query processing and yet maintain just a single version of the database. For more information about the topics covered in this module, you can use these resources.